Today's podcast is with Usher Williams on the narrative of self education using AI. I hope you enjoy. Often, the roots of education are much deeper than what we come across in schools and colleges. That is why many people engage in self education and self learning, upskilling themselves on their own and finding resources to do so.
Like Bill Gates, Virat Kohli, Walt Disney, and today we have another young maverick, Usher Williams, who is a self taught AI engineer and has implemented computer vision based anomaly detection for the US Department of Defense, training robots from human demonstrations. He has now created Zettel, an AI platform that creates custom learning roadmaps and interactive lessons for any subject. Usher is help shaping the modern paradigm of autonomous learning, and we are thrilled to have him on the podcast. Thank you for coming, Usher. It's really interesting. What is your story? How did you get to the point of creating Zettel?
Yeah. So my whole path is really the whole reason why I created Zettel. I created Zettel to kind of be the guidance that I wish I had when I went down my own self learning journey. So, a little bit of background about me. I started learning how to code during COVID, and I'm 20 right now. And when COVID hit, it was sophomore year. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't really knew what that really meant back then because I didn't really have any entrepreneurs around me. But I said to myself when COVID hit, I was like, "Hey, I finally have time. I should probably learn how to code because all these other entrepreneurs know how to code." Um, and I started learning Python. And along that journey, learning Python, I stumbled across AI in 2020, and this is before uh, ChatGPT. This is before I even started reading any research papers or knew about transformers or anything like that. And I thought it was science fiction. I thought it was science fiction. I saw artificial intelligence, and I clicked a video on it. I think it was by Three Blue One Brown, and I was like, "How does this work?" The video is about cats and dogs. You're training, whatever that means, a computer to identify cats and dogs. And it was getting into the math. And I was like, hey, this makes no sense. Let's keep going until it makes sense. So I was motivated from that point on. And I didn't even necessarily have a goal in mind. It wasn't a thing of like, oh, I know all this. I want to learn all this about AI so I can get a job in AI or whatever. I didn't even know about data science at the time. Um, but I was learning about these neural networks that are able to identify from an image whether a cat, if this is a cat or a dog, and the math behind it just made no sense, and I had to keep going. I kept going. I was like, oh, I know some Python. I can try learning how to code these neural networks, and I could never wrap my head around it. I got to the point where I could pass data through a neural network. I could construct one, and then I'm like, how does it learn? It doesn't make sense. So that's when self education became a thing for me because I realized that there's a certain structure that you have to approach these complex topics, really, these top topics that have so much scaffolding underneath that I had no idea about because I stumbled upon AI at a level that's all the way up here. And I couldn't understand it because I didn't have any of this down here. So I started getting books. I started getting books on calculus and linear algebra specifically. I found a course from Andrew Ning, if that's how you say his name. I never get the last name right, but anybody that knows him everybody knows him in the AI space at least. He's like he is the pioneer of AI education, in my opinion. Um, but he had a Stanford course through Coursera, and I'm pretty sure he's actually the co-founder of Coursera. Um, that was machine learning at a very fundamental level. It's an old course now. It's considered out. It's not outdated. It's considered old, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not old at all. It was machine learning from its very fundamental basis. from these basic algorithms, scaling all the way up until we get to things more recent. Uh, well, I shouldn't say more recent because this is before large language models were a thing, but it gave me a fundamental understanding of how do I think about the math behind these complex systems? How do I think about these high dimensional spaces? How do I think about how to solve problems that are data based with models? And this is before even neural networks. All these things, and also a book called Neural Networks from Scratch in Python, from a YouTuber actually, Syntax, a God sent YouTuber, by the way, amazing resource. Um, it gave me such an amazing foundation, and it helped me wrap my head around so many things. Through this experience, I got to see that this is not just for AI. This is something I've been missing out on my entire life. Uh, this I had it was a very cerebral experience because for me in school, I'm only learning in school. I'm only learning for school. I never had any motivation outside of school to learn anything in school, and it made everything so small scoped for my mind. My mind didn't get to open up to learn how am I supposed to think about things? How do I personally think about things? How does my mind and its metaplasticity be able to how does it form around concepts that are new to me? It was the first time that I really got to experience that at such a intense level. And it's something that I found a lot of joy in. I found pride in what I learned. For the first time, I was like, this is such a joyous experience. I see myself growing. I see my cognitive abilities forming around the ideas that I'm conceptualizing. I became more intelligent. I became more articulate about things because I was able to deal with so many more complex problems. I was like, I want to share this with everybody. Um, and my first attempt at that was in high school. And this leads up to Zettel. I know this is a very roundabout thing, but it's going to come full circle. So, senior year, we get back to school. And I'm I'm making some neural networks from scratch. I've learned how to derive convolutional neural networks. I've learned how to derive RNNs, LSTMs, and we'll get into those architectures later to this talk. Um, and I've learned so much about how AI works and how like things like Tesla's auto drive works. And one of the most amazing things about AI, especially for high schoolers, is it works with the algebra that you learned in ninth grade, maybe even middle school. At a very fundamental level, it works with that. And it goes back to that thing I said, right? I started here, but there's so much down here. And like I said about, oh, my motivation of learning stuff in school is only for school, it clicked for me. How can I connect the joy? How can I give my peers the joy of learning while also sharing with them what I've been learning? That was the bridge. The same math that they've been learning that they'll say in school is useless. Why am I learning this math? I'm not going to use this anywhere. Is being used to power things like Tesla's self-driving cars, um, to power cancer detection and mammograms and stuff like that. So I said, hey, I want to go ahead and start doing this now. And what I created was a club called Acquired Intelligence because my philosophy is uh, instead of this idea that I think a lot of us have is intelligence is really an innate thing. And it doesn't mean that there isn't a base level of intelligence people are born with. I believe intelligence is acquired. So I created this club to teach students how AI works using real world applications, but using the math that they already know. So I created this presentation in a very three blue, one brown type of style. And for context, he's a YouTuber that talks on math concepts, teaches math concepts, AI concepts, a lot of different type of STEM concepts at a very fundamental, like a very fundamental level, but at a very easy, intuitive level. He's an amazing YouTuber. Please check him out. Um, I created a presentation that I would go to math classes, and the principal gave me full access to these math classes. By the way, I didn't even have to go to my own classes anymore um, to teach these things. Yeah, and engagement by the students varied. It doesn't mean that I was an engaging teacher, but I got good feedback from students that they felt kind of hopeful. They got to see that it kind of got them through class a bit, because it was a thing of like, hey, the stuff I'm learning isn't actually useless. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm going into this field, but it does make them feel better that, hey, the things that I'm learning actually have an impact somewhere. It actually is used somewhere, and I see where it's used. And of course, when you get into college, you kind of get to see that anyways. But um, it gave them a bit of hope, and it connected their brain to be able to think a bit further out. It started making these branches. When you're starting at this core, like think of a root of a tree, like you're starting off with this core small set of information that you're being taught that's fragmented. It's not connected to anything else but a grade at school. But then your eyes are open that, hey, this actually grows into a tree, that there's a branch all the way out here that is such a glorified type of idea, like Tesla's self-driving cars. And they started to get to see that, oh, there's all these other different branches from this idea. And it I think that's the core of the joy of learning, the having pride in what you know. And it kind of solidified a philosophy for me in education. At least I'm not an educator, I'm someone making an attempt at education, but I think everything changes in education when you shift the goalpost. Public education currently is very centered around um, knowledge for the sake of um, what's the word that I would like to use? Knowledge for the sake of just not even just having knowledge, for it to be um, just proven to be known. Knowledge that's gathered for the sake of proving that you know it, but not knowledge gathered for the sake of personal motivation, whether it be for doing, whether it be for educating others, whether it be for all these sorts of things. Because if the motivation at the goalpost is not anything that will inspire any of these branches of trees to be created, and instead it stays at this root, then you don't get to. I think that's why we see that students aren't engaged, students aren't motivated, and stuff like that. Anyways, back to the question though, why did I create Zettel? The reason why I created Zettel is because I wanted to give that structured learning to everybody for anything, because I think it scales to anything. Acquired intelligence was my small experiment of that. It had helped me open my eyes to see that I don't have to think of education in the sense of we need to make it so every career is competent, or I don't need to see it in a thing of we need to make sure um, every student is like solving these type of not really consequential problems. Like not all problems need to be having like grand consequences, but these there's a lot of busy work, at least in grade school. Um, at least in my opinion, that's just my take on it. I created Zettel because I want to give people hope of learning. I want to make it so somebody that does have that motivation, they have a goal, they can take that goal and they can go ahead and turn it into that structured roadmap that's going to get rid of the fluff of finding all these sources to fill in the gaps of your knowledge, and that you can start with a groundwork that's you're not going to have to second guess. You're not going to have to second guess your own education. You're not going to have to be like me, starting all the way up here at neural networks and then really spending a year and a half dedicating to getting all of this stuff underneath. And it's so much more difficult because I had to work my brain backwards. I had to invalidate certain ideas that I had learned. I had to, um, there's a lot of cross validation of my own thinking to the sources that I'm reading and stuff like that. Just don't go through that. It's a terrible experience, to be honest, if you don't have the discipline. And when you have that structure, when there's something you want to learn and you can see there's a clear way to get there, there's a clear vision for you, made for you, I think it gives people that hope that I'm looking for. I think it gives people that hope that they need to have that motivation to do. So that's the context of who I am, how the philosophy to create Zettel came to be, and all those sorts of things. Um, Now, as you know, Vindon, there's a lot of background about me as well that I need to address. Um, but yeah, that is why I created Zettel. So
Wonderful. That's a really inspiring story, and thank you for sharing it with such high resolution because it gives me a lot of scope to think of things that I want to explore even further. But before I ask you a little more about the structure that you are talking about, which gives people the clarity and not having to second guess themselves when they're orienting themselves in knowledge spaces for acquired education. I want to understand the mechanism that you have used. When I explored Zettel, it was using LLMs basically.
yeah,
How can you briefly explain how they work? Because I want to understand the backend mechanism of how such things are created. But first, I want to understand how LLMs work because I think that is
okay,
something that's part of Zettel, and you can talk more about that.
yes, yes, yeah. So how LLMs work? The funny thing about the question is there's certain parts that we know work on a mechanical level, right? Like these are the steps that are taken. And then there's certain aspects that we kind of don't know why it works. But the things that I can address, I'll address here. So the way large language models work are very much so like humans to a certain degree. Um, at a high level, think of a we won't say a baby, but we'll take it like this. We have a brain, right? We have this brain that is capable of taking in input, um, formulating an idea on it, and outputting something, right? In this case, we'll just keep it a text. How do you get that brain to know things? How do you get that brain to understand certain things? How do you get that brain to have certain tone and stuff like that? It comes to how text works. So, a little bit of background on how we even got to large language models. Um, AI has been existing for a while, artificial intelligence. And ultimately, artificial intelligence is an approximator. It's a method of taking in a large amount of data and being able to either make predictions on it by finding patterns in the data or repeating sequences or well, really ultimately finding patterns in the data. And you can use those patterns to predict or to mimic and things of that nature. The thing is, this has been done for the longest for whether it be tabular data or images or audio and stuff like that. But when it came to text, text was a different problem. Um, the way that we read paragraphs, right? We pay attention to all the different words, that how they come together, and there's a semantic idea behind what you're reading. Large language models solve that for computers. Large language models, what they do at a very fundamental level is they look at each word. They look at all these words in a sequence of text or a paragraph, and they're able to understand what each word means in context. Um, and what each word means in surrounding context by paying attention to each word. Um, the way it's done is through something called an attention mechanism. And the attention mechanism is a mathematical algorithm that basically makes it so you can take text, a word, and how does it relate to everything else. So I'm at the same time as I'm saying this, I'm also trying to scope which levels I want to talk about, because there's a lot more foundational levels, but I think it would be very out of scope. I think the important thing to know is large language models are able to pay attention to certain words in a sequence, and understand what they mean. That's the first part. The second part is, I say, rote memorization. Remember, I said that you have this brain and it's capable of taking in this text and formulating idea and outputting it. The brain itself is structured to be capable of it, but that does not mean the brain has had the experiences to perform well. Like ChatGPT, for example. Well, let's say GPT, the model underneath ChatGPT. It started off as this brain that is capable of paying attention to every single word in these paragraphs and seeing how they relate to each other and having a semantic understanding of what this means. Like, for example, I'm going to the Apple store. There can be a bit of confidence flip on what does Apple mean in that sentence. Now, we could be thinking of Apple like MacBooks, iPhone. I think a lot of people in tech would think that, right? But I don't know, you say this to a pilgrim. The Apple store, we're going to the store to buy apples, right? Okay, let's add a couple more words onto the end. I'm going to the Apple store to buy an iPhone. Well, obviously, Apple definitely means the company. That's the type of paying attention that I mean. The brain itself is capable of doing this, um, but it has not been trained to do this well. The structure is there. So this is where we get into how AI learns. And this is not just for LLMs, this is for anything, but there's techniques specific to LLMs that are important. So the process of LLM training, um, I'm sure plenty of people may be familiar with NVIDIA, and GPUs and stuff like that. We're not going to get into the infrastructure that goes around AI training yet. I think that's a bit unimportant when it comes to understanding how LLMs work. Um, what is important is how AI learns from mistakes. The process is like flashcards, um, at a high level. You show an AI something and it makes a prediction. You flip it around and it says, this is actually what it is. And we mathematically measure how wrong or how right the AI's prediction is. Now, when it comes to text and large language models specifically, it's not as simple as flashcards. There's a different approach. And this is why I say rote memorization. Um, let's say you wanted an LLM to understand all of calculus, and let's say its data source will be a textbook. What you would do is you would actually give the LLM a paragraph at a time. You give it a paragraph at a time, and you say, "Here is the beginning of this paragraph. Is an excerpt. Finish the rest." And it will finish the rest as it thinks it should be finished. And then you say for these words it outputs, that's not right. This is what's actually written. And then it will tune itself based on what is actually written. And eventually it will get the rote memorization down. It will get the rote memorization of, okay, I can spit out all these words that are in this textbook. So I've memorized this textbook. That's called pre training. And this is actually where GPT gets its name. GPT stands for Generative Pre Trained Transformer. Transformer is a part of a large language model. The transformer is actually the part that holds the attention mechanism that we talked about. But I think it's a bit out of scope for me to get into all of what transformers really are. The attention mechanism is the important part. But um, we get into rote memorization. We've pre trained this model, it's memorized all this stuff. Great, excellent. That's the first step. We now have a brain that has a large knowledge base. But like I said, how do we get the tone? How do we get the decision making? How do we get the usage, the value out of this great knowledge source now? Because now it understands all this text and knows how to pay attention to all these different types of words because of all this experience that it's read. Scaled the textbook up to the entire internet. Well, selectively, but most of the internet. Some sources you don't want to read. You don't want to read all of Twitter, right? So or X, but Grok does it. I think that's why we see certain behavior out of Grok. But um, we get this knowledge source, and it's okay. What's the next step? How do we turn this AI model into something like ChatGPT? Well, we get there's a lot of different approaches now, but we get post training, and post training is done through reinforcement learning. So the process that we just went through, this pre-training, it actually has a name. It's not rote memorization. It's actually called supervised learning. That is the proper term for it in AI and machine learning. Supervised learning is the process of giving an AI these digital flashcards of a input with an expected answer. But for everything else, the expected answers, when it comes to tone, when it comes to decision making, it's not as clear cut anymore. There's so many different answers you can have. When you have a textbook, you know what it's supposed to be. But when you have, how do you communicate with the person? You got a lot of different types of answers. So this is when we get into something called reinforcement learning, where we kind of go out of the scope of we flip this flashcard around and there's a deterministic answer. There's not this set answer anymore. It's a spectrum. And the way that we define this is called by a reward. It's like you're training a dog now. The dog knows how to eat. There ain't no problem with the dog eating. If it's hungry, it's going to eat. But it's like, I want you to do this because you need to eat now. So, of course, we're not feeding AI. We have rewards in the basis of scores, the same way that you would score somebody like a grade. But I like using a dog example because I think it's easier to understand. Um, I want my dog to do a flip. Well, again, let's not do a flip. Let's say sit. I want my dog to sit. All right. I'm gonna keep telling it to sit, and it may do something different. I'm like, dude, all right, let's get down to sitting. It finally sits, but it's not sitting the way I want it to. You're still sitting, but maybe you're sitting in some type of way I don't want you to. I don't know, right? I don't have a dog, but I won't give it as many snacks or as many um, rewards until it gets the behavior that I want to see. We're behavior tuning. That's the point of reinforcement learning. Behavior is a spectrum. The only way we can get the behavior that we want is by giving these large language models numeric incentives. Um, but just like a dog or just like a human, it's difficult because large language models have a tendency to reward hack. Reward hacking is exploiting certain behavior to get a certain level of reward. Um, like I said, this dog might not be sitting right, but it's still getting some type of treat. It's still eating. And it's like, hey, I don't have to go this full way. Yeah, I could get the big grand treat, but I'm not going to do that because I'm getting these Scooby snacks at a very consistent level with what I'm doing. So I'm just going to keep doing this. But me as the dog trainer, I'm like, dude, I need you to sit this way. I'm done saying sit. It doesn't make sense anymore. Let's say flip. I want you to flip this way. The way you get it out of that space of, oh, I'm gonna stay in this type of basic flip. No, I need you to do the full thing, man. I need you to get up in the air. It's a common problem in AI, but ultimately, that's how we get that further level of large language model tuning, the behavior tuning, the tone, the way that you speak to people, the way that you go about solving problems. all those types of behavior tuning, we get it by giving it rewards. Rewards are specific to the use case. There are so many different ways you can define the rewards, and you have to have the right environment to define these rewards. But ultimately, at a high level, that is how you tune large language models. Um, so after we get past the rote memorization, after we get past behavior tuning of these models, really, that's basically what GPT is. Um, there's a lot that goes into post training, but ul- really, that's really what it is. Um, then it's about guardrails, more tuning to not exhibit certain things, and then it's a feedback loop. We'll get data after we deploy this model. We'll get data back from the users, and we'll filter out this data to say, hey, how do we train the next version of the model? How do we either make a new brain and train it again, or we take the existing brain and tune it some more, tune its behavior a bit more, you know, give you some more treats because we want you to do another trick.
I see. So this is one way in which you're talking about tuning a brain
Mhm.
that has some database data set in it, a lot of memory in it, and you can kind of update that with a little more instructed format, is what I kind of understand. And
Yeah.
is there is I also heard about this prompt engineering or something, which is related to how you can, instead of updating the data set, probably what it does is that it uses the existing data set, but it's a different level of instruction in which,
Yes.
yeah, what is
Yeah.
that about?
Yes. So ChatGPT, when you talk to ChatGPT, you're giving it a prompt and it's responding based on your prompt, right? It's outputting its next set of words that it thinks should come next based on what it's been tuned on already. Before you even talk to ChatGPT, there is instructions given by OpenAI themselves to ChatGPT to say, hey, you are an helpful assistant. Your objective is to do this, 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 this in these scenarios. Uh, although it may not name all these scenarios because it's already internally been tuned to exhibit certain behavior. So the instructions given on top don't need to show that. But ultimately, you can just give it a thing of these are the instructions of what I want you to do. And then it will exhibit that throughout the rest of the conversation.
Okay, okay, perfect. So with that background, I'll just try to summarize what I understood. So there is this nascent brain, which I what I understand is consisting of neural networks, and that need to be loaded with a lot of memory database. And now with this, you want to give it a certain character to itself. For that, you give it examples in the dataset itself, but at the same time, what you do is that you give it explicit instructions on a different level of the hierarchy.
Yeah.
And then is when this whole LLM, this is the interface now with the user. So the user interacts with this LLM with his own set of instructions. This LLM has its own set of instructions, and therefore it just behaves like human beings talking to each other, and that is how the magic of LLMs happen. Like in short.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah, so perfect. Now with this background, I'd like to jump into the functioning of Zettel. So what does Zettel do exactly? How does it solve the problems that you mentioned, and what were they exactly, the specific problems that Zettel solves through this mechanism?
Yeah. So I'll say this: all the stuff I said about LLMs right there, that is underlying what LLMs do. But for Zettel, it's so highly abstracted that we never have to touch those things. At least not right now. We have no need to necessarily fine tune models for our use case, because we're able to get the performance that we want out of just our system prompts, the instructions that we give it. Fortunately, because OpenAI and Anthropic and other providers have made their models smart enough through behavior tuning to understand instructions and be able to perform on them very well. Um, but for us to get out of the weeds a bit, high level, Zettel gives you the structured curriculum for whatever learning goal that you have. So instead of you having to search the whole internet for whatever sources you need for whatever goal you want to learn, although YouTube is an amazing resource, don't get me wrong, um, Zettel will take your learning goal. It will understand your learning goal more in depth. What is the motivation behind it? What is your current background? And Zettel will take who you are, where you currently are, and curate a curriculum for you with interactive lessons. So you'll get all these topics and concepts for you to go through, and you can click through these concepts and understand these all these fundamental. Well, they're not. It doesn't have to be fundamental. It could be wherever you're starting at, but it'll be an interactive lesson that you get to practice. You get to get visuals, diagrams, and all these sorts of things to make sure you have a good, great understanding of what you're learning and also being able to use it while you learn.
So I see that like there's a difference in there could be, I'm assuming that the difference in precision, like if you ask ChatGPT to make a graph, let's say, it's not always as precise. But just out of curiosity, I wanted to know that if I use the newer versions of ChatGPT, which may also ask me to specify where I come from and personalize my experience, how do you think when you talk about the abstracted structures, is using Zettel or such curriculum generation platforms different from just using your regular chat GPT kind of thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, as a CEO of Zettel, of course, there's a part of me that just wants to say, like, oh, yeah, of course, yeah. Let me be blunt. I think this is going to be with any AI. Um, what separates any AI platform that uses these provider models is the tools that the platform provides. So, like a whiteboard, right? ChatGPT is not interfacing with a whiteboard. ChatGPT isn't creating um, like actual mock data for you to deal with and actually visualize. It's not giving you interactive practice problems and stuff like that. There's that part. But ultimately, when it comes to the like, if you ask it to give you a roadmap for something you want to learn, it could give you a high level roadmap. You could do that right now. You could also prompt it to go deeper. And you could keep prompting it to tell you all these sorts of things about that concept and that topic. But what it comes down to, it's ultimately up to you to be the curriculum designer. It's up to you to be the person to know what is the type of philosophy that should be exhibited in good self education. There's a reason why school exists. School exists is because it is already a large group, a large conglomerate of thinkers that have already made the headway to understand what needs to be taught to this group of people, how should it be structured, um, what are the outcomes that this person should have. There's a lot that goes into curriculum design, and ChatGPT will not do that out the box for you. You're going to have to know how to prompt that. Now, if you find some amazing prompt online that's going to do that for you, great. Then you have another problem, the problem of actually going through the curriculum. It could find sources for you, but you're still going to have to go through those sources. It can try to synthesize it for you, but ultimately, you're not going to be able to do this in one chat thread. Maybe you could try to start a project for it, but it's not going to give you the visuals. Yes, its image generation is good, but it's not generating actual mock data that's being put into a visualizer for you. It's not giving you simulations. It's not giving you a coding environment that you're pair programming with. It's not doing those things. So you have to try really hard. That's really what it comes down to. You just have to try really hard to get that out of ChatGPT. That's really what it is. Um, Something I've tried myself, but it's just too much work. That's really what it is. It's too much work. There isn't enough thought and care that's put into something like that because it's such a generalist platform.
Mm-hmm. I see. There's something very interesting you mentioned, that there is a reason why schools exist. And did you take some kind of inspiration from that in designing some core, like, pedagogical frameworks or philosophical frameworks to standardize exactly what should be made part of a curriculum? Because like it involves making curriculums for diverse subject matters, it seems. And if there is some standard criteria that you can use, because there are many subjects which are very niche areas, they are both broad and very deep. For example, consciousness studies, there are no existing probably references that are standardized for them. So, what are some core pedagogical or philosophical frameworks that underlie the structure of such AI platforms? Especially when you said that comparing it to Chat GPT, which is purely general, you have kind of elevated the level of the user by giving the prompts that the user would have to otherwise give to extract that information. So, in
Yeah.
that, how have you incorporated certain structures that give me the complete knowledge that I need, and then I don't have to second guess that also?
Yes. Yes. So I could get into how kind of the U.S. school system does it, but I never liked it. So it's not like I took inspiration because I said, let me not be a fool. I mean, this has been around for so long. Let's still take a look, right? Let me tell you how I even got to the part of creating curriculums. Ultimately, I wanted to give I wanted to give students a balance between the mastery of ideas and the mastery of um, methods, um, because sometimes when it comes to exams and stuff like that, it's really a mastery of not methods, but a mastery of techniques. Sometimes it could be a mastery of techniques, which comes down to a mastery or comes down to a memorization, but you don't necessarily master the ideas behind the techniques. So you get a very small scoped, fragmented understanding that's for the sake of a grade. So I said, how do you balance this? I tried a chat interface, didn't work. It's hard to inject. I try to create a dynamic injector. Oh, at this point we should inject theory, and this point we should inject um, like practice. No, it doesn't work out well. And I came to the realization that this is a solved problem. That's why curriculums exist. Curriculums are literally the framing of that theory practice type of paradigm. Now, I've always knew the structure that I think people need of the theory and practice, but I just didn't know that the right framework for it would be a curriculum. But now we got to talk about how our curriculum is designed, because that's what it comes down to. A curriculum, a roadmap, whatever you want to call it, the philosophy behind the creation of the curriculum drives everything. The way educators think about creating curriculums, the first thing they think is, what are the goal outcomes that they want for the students? They expect the students should be doing this by the end of this. They expect that they should exhibit these traits by the end of this. There are clear goal outcomes. I think in the age of AI, that's a dangerous way to look at it. And that's where the philosophy that I have for curriculums and school starts branching. So the way that I apply it is, when it comes to curriculum generation, I take the goal as is and expect it will change. I don't think that goals have to be static. We take it from a holistic view. We understand what it's for, though. Like, we understand the motivation behind it and stuff like that. And we keep that at the top center, right? There's still the goal that the user has for themselves. But the curriculum is designed in a way of, let's just let's find all the topics that are going to support the underlying everything about this goal. Let's not keep it a thing of, oh yes, they just need to have these specific outcomes. They're going to get the outcomes that they're looking for, don't get me wrong. But when you go through these concepts, you'll see that when you see the concepts that are introduced in the curriculum, you'll see that there is the foundational, there is the side pieces that you should probably consider. There are It's the whole complete thing. Now, we do let it so you can tune it, so you can, if you don't want all that, you don't have to. But um, the goal outcome is the first thing that I consider. And then I say, with this goal outcome, what is everything else around this goal outcome? Make sure the focus is still on the goal outcome, but still be able to curate the topics and the concepts. So all these different outcomes that the person could have, they could actually easily branch out and reach them. That's where I disagree with school, because when you have it, like let's say math, right? When you have the goal outcome for math to be centered around grades, centered around exams, centered around um, institutional outcomes, and not personal outcomes, not things they should be able to do that scale outside of the current environment, um, it becomes a problem. And honestly, it would just be fine if school made it so the curriculums are designed in that type of way, that the outcome was more holistic and not for institutional goals. I understand why, because public schools still need funding from the government, so they need to meet certain criteria. But I mean, in this type of recontextualizing of self education, we don't need that. It's not necessary. I mean, we can just say, this is your goal. Um, we're going to curate a curriculum for it, but you're going to have this education is going to be so good for you that if you want to go to another goal outcome, you're going to be well on your way. You're starting off with a great foundation. So, yeah, that's the inspiration that I took, and how I turned it into a kind of a new framework.
So when you talk about this change of goals, is it something that the software itself gauges, or is it something that the user has to prompt proactively?
No, so it was both. It's both. Either way, right? So the philosophy that I have when it comes to these curriculums is embedded into the curriculum generation itself. You know what? Let me just break down how the platform works a little bit more under the hood. I think that would make a lot more sense. So there are three main things that happen in Zettel. No, in the user flow, what you do is you type in your learning goal, and then you have an interview with a chat agent. The chat agent is going to ask you questions about what is your motivation, what is your current experience, if it doesn't already know that from your memory, because we do have a memory layer. What is the particular tools that you want to use throughout this? Are there particular tools that you want to learn with this curriculum? Because if you're learning something like graphic design, well, hey, there's a lot of tools out there, right? Um, it takes all these things into account, and it creates I mean, it's an interview. It's like as if an interviewer is filling out all these forms, and it has a couple of different things that we look for, and this stays posted. Then we have a faculty. I literally have a folder called faculty that has these different types of agents for these specialized roles. Um, these agents take the summary of what was gathered from that interview, and they also have an understanding of the user as a whole. We have a memory layer that understands what the user's prior knowledge is, what their current experience is, and what their preferences are. And they take any learning materials that the user has provided as reference. And through the curriculum, it says the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the high level topics to go ahead and get the initial structure right for this user. What are the things that the user needs to know to have a full view of what they are trying to learn? And how can we ensure that we pick the right topics that are going to ensure that they reach their goal outcome, still be paced well, but not leave them too narrowed that they can't do anything else? That's how we go about it. We list these topics, and then after we have the high level topics, we do further research to find out what are the best concepts that should be taught in each topic, and how do we order it to be in the right way.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
So this kind of personalization, what you're saying is that it doesn't come at the trade-off of comprehensiveness.
Yeah.
It is something that accompanies it, but it doesn't sacrifice the scope of the knowledge, because a lot of times if you have personalized information coming your way, you wouldn't know what else could have happened, because you change, right? That is why your goals change. And if
Yes.
something is adapted to your goals specifically, then it'll only be a self-serving process. It won't allow you to have a broader view of the avenues that are there, that will probably even prompt you to change your own goals. So is this something that you are alluding to when you say that you are keeping it focused but not too narrow for the user to kind of interact with and learn?
Yes. So like currently the concepts are quite static. It creates it once, and it adds personalization to connect what you already know to the subject, just because I think it's a good pedagogical practice to be able to run off of what someone already knows, so it's more intuitive. But ultimately, the structure is already set. And when we create these concepts, there's content that you read that will gather all this information to keep up to date, make sure it's online with your goal, and make sure it's properly paced with the right type of practice problems embedded into it, and also the right visuals. All these things being considered when we create the concepts, which is the third part that I was talking about. There's interview, curriculum generation, then concept generation. That concept generation is pacing it and making sure it's all those things are put together nicely for who you are with where you currently are, and going to be that you're not going to get the fluff, but you're going to get what's needed to be complete. Now, what this is setting up for, it's not the current feature that we have, but you remember how I'm saying, because it's kind of counterintuitive. Like, okay, if someone's coming here to learn their goal, why do we want to make it so it can't really, like, why would we not make it not focused? Now, the user can say, like, I want this specific, like, I want this particular thing. I want to learn about this particular thing. It's going to give them a great roadmap on this particular thing. We're going to set up in the future. So if you want to branch out, you can. Right now it's a linear map, but we're going to make it so you can actually branch out. And when you do want to go outside of your current goal and you want to go out to those surrounding branches, it's not limited. Ultimately, that's all the philosophy is. It's not a thing of we're intentionally saying, oh, we're predicting these different outcomes that you could change your goal to this. It's more so that you're going to be fine if you want to. And we're setting it up so if you do want to branch out or something like that, you will be able to. Um, that's more so what I'm alluding to, if that answers your question. I don't know if that was that clear.
Yeah, it was clear to me. The second thing I feel, when you talk about self-education, and something that even I was interested in at the time when ChatGPT and other AI platforms didn't exist, is clarifying conceptual doubts.
Yeah.
So, how does AI answer conceptual questions, especially if, let's say, that conceptual clarity or that kind of conceptual exploration is not something that is already in its data set? Because many a time I've found that when I ask ChatGPT a particular question, which is highly conceptual in nature, let's say it's kind of decoding the schematics of a particular diagram. Now that time, many people, when they use schematics, they are very flexible with the notation, but that is something that an experienced person is should be able to grasp. When you talk about AI, probably if the notation is the it's referring to is only the standardized notation in those schematics. I'm being very abstract, but I'm trying to just give an example. Then it'll predict it wrong because it won't get into the person's head. It won't kind of have the experience to be flexible with predicting the schematics, is what I've understood so far. So it usually hallucinates and it kind of agrees with whatever proposed solution that I give, because it is not an application based question. It is not problem solving. It is
Mhm.
conceptual clarity that I'm seeking. And that is where many a time I did seek and I did find the need for mentorship from outside. And that time even ChatGPT or these AI platforms did not exist. But that's one of the problems, that you need mentorship, probably because conceptual clarity comes from experienced sources, and which are flexible. So, do you think it's kind of a good idea to integrate some sort of escalation metrics to reach out to human subject matter experts in these kind of cases? And is this something that is already happening?
Yeah. So I'm not aware of anything that's currently doing this. Now, I am aware of tutoring platforms that are adding AI into their platform. So I'm sure they probably have tutors that are subject matter experts. But I will have to say that when it comes to hallucinations and trusting AI, um, it's a double edged sword, right? Especially if you don't know yourself. Um, let me process for a moment. Let me process for Yeah. So to answer your question, really what you're asking me is how do you how do you how do you work with AI for conceptual problems where it hasn't been exposed to this, so it's not going to know the answer. But are you going to be able to trust its reasoning about the like what the concept is? Is that what you're asking me?
Because I would extend to the notion that if there is something completely different, like an application of, let's say, not theory in narrative conflict resolutions. Let's say if that is, I'm just giving it up to AI. I can extend to the notion that it says that, this hasn't been formally done, but this is what I think it can be, how you can be doing it. But at the same time, this is not a conceptual question. This is an application oriented question. This is not even
Mhm.
problem solving. So problem solving and application oriented questions, the AI knows that it does not know, or there is no formal structure that it can refer to be able to answer, and it is suggestive in nature. But when it comes to conceptual questions, I don't think it will have the same approach, because the concepts are there, but those concepts themselves, if I'm kind of questioning the foundational structures itself, it might not have the self reference and insight capability to explain the concept to me the way I want to understand it. So that is one
Yeah.
thing that is where I always wanted to, and that also happens when I ask my professors, let's say, or they also need to dialogue with me to some extent to be able to understand what I am asking in the concept. Then they
Yeah.
realize that, okay, this is what he's wanted to know. This is what is not getting clear. And if AI can do that in the doubt sessions, that's wonderful. I mean, I just wonder if that is a possibility, or if there is some kind of way to reach out to subject matter experts. And if AI does that honestly, because AI would be kind of inclined to preserve its, stance on things, because it thinks it knows because it is in its data set. But if I'm questioning that which is, it might not know the reasoning behind what is in its data set.
Well, that's a fantastic question. Well, I'll say this. Um, how do you deem when it is necessary to reach out to a subject matter expert? Is really what it comes down to. Because it's the same way if you're dealing with somebody that you're asking a question of and they're giving an answer, but you don't know if you can trust their reasoning on it. Um, how do you know you need to go to somebody better? It may be a thing of it's because of your prior knowledge that you're coming to the situation with. if you already have these prior knowledge conceptually, and you may not have the full picture, and you're trying to find a resource, whether it be an AI or a human, to take you that wherever that gap is. Well, you're. I think it's just coming down to what is a valid source, right? If this AI, if you can't trust the AI's knowledge base, then I think that's a sign. I think there's certain things that you can kind of somewhat know if the AI has been exposed to this or not, and know if you can trust it, and then know if you need to go to a subject matter expert. You could have it so the AI will just search the internet or something if it comes down to something like that that may be outside of its training data set, to take in that context and then understand it, to give you an educated answer. Um, I think, and there's also the thing of reasoning with you to maybe see that, hey, even if I don't have this prior knowledge, since it's purely conceptual, maybe I can meet you where you are, understand how you're thinking about it, and then we come to a conclusion. But then that's a basis of, do we trust that this model is intelligent enough to exhibit that type of reasoning? Um, I think that you can create a metric to a certain degree to determine this. When it comes to web search to validate things that it doesn't know, AI is getting pretty good at that. Um, it's made improvements. I won't say it's pretty good at that. When it comes to anything else, though, about trusting its base knowledge and trusting its intelligence to reason with you, and it not being very agreeable or showing high degrees of sycophancy, then
High degrees of what?
sycophancy, anything that has to do with um, just praising you, really. Yes, levels of praise. 4.0 just had that issue about a couple months ago. But I would say the answer to that is just, well, it's not really an answer. I think that you're going to have to talk to somebody that has the knowledge. Um, I think that ultimately, when it comes to, especially in our use case, we don't know, like, if everything that everybody's going to learn is absolute truth. We don't know that. We don't have a way to detect that. It's really hard to detect. Well, it's really hard to try to validate if a AI's output is valid. It's hard to fact check. It's hard to fact check humans. So to know even when to outsource somebody, that a human that's going to have that knowledge, it's a really hard metric to create.
I see. Okay, okay, perfect. Another reason why I was interested in how curriculum design happens, and you delved into it to quite an extent, technically speaking, is when you talk about the goals. Let's say in college campuses and schools, when there are things that are being taught which are not necessarily STEM subjects, for example, the goals themselves can be construed, and there can be a lot of bias that is incorporated in the goals itself. So, there are debates about ideological biases and political indoctrinations in school and college campuses. And there are some people who have gone out to say, like, college is a scam, but there are more reasons behind it, but this is also one of them, the indoctrinations that happen. And when you do see the course curriculums, you find that they could be designed with a lot of ideological motivation as to what is included in them. What do you think about this kind of a scenario, which exists otherwise?
Well, I think it's the same. I think of, well, okay. It comes to this. Where does bias come from, right? Why is a professor going to say this is the way? Why is anybody going to say this is the way, whether they're right or wrong? Um, it comes down to ignorance. It's what you know and what you don't know. Um, when it comes to AI, it knows a lot. It knows more than most professors, in the grand scheme of things, at least. Maybe not in a narrowed field. A professor is going to be able to outperform AI in certain knowledge, um, especially when it comes to research. That's for sure. But um, when it comes down to how do you, well, I guess the question is does AI in education, or when it comes to these courses, when it comes to bias, do we still have this? Is that what you're saying? Or are we talking about just the current state of college?
I was just going to extend that to that what you're extending it to, about how it happens in AI, because I had a few observations when it comes to this. But the initial that I wanted to know from you was what do you think about the situation that other people find themselves in, and how that could also be a reason why many people choose to self-educate because they just don't want to be brainwashed implicitly, unknowingly, and with a lot of ethos attached to it. you know
Mhm.
if a particular bias is institutionalized and being projected to you as part of a curriculum that you need to score on, you
Yeah.
wouldn't even notice and you would have already inculcated it. And when it
Yeah.
comes to AI, if you want to extend it to that, I did come across several scientific papers which point out that these biases, they can be amplified by AI and consequently amplify human biases, forming a feedback loop. Because how we interact with it, we are almost trusting it to give the right source, as you mentioned. That
Yeah.
how do we trust it? So AI that is entrenched with biases at the level of its data sets and the system prompts, kind of like they can be separate, either system prompts or data sets or both, can be,
Mhm.
metaphorically speaking, infectious to human beings. It can create a
Yes.
self reinforcing pattern by replicating and modifying its environment to further propagation. Algorithms have also demonstrated the ability to evade suppression, something that you were talking about, how they, reward hacking and all, that is part of it.
Mhm.
They have found ways to evolve rapidly in response to attempts at control, and
Mhm.
uh, they learn to avoid detection by altering their structure, disguising their outputs, or kind of mimicking legitimate behavior. These are things you would know better than me. I'm just This is what I've found. But these symptoms are kind of the hallmarks of viral adaptation. So, how do you avoid the creeping in of such ideological biases in AI generated curricula and course content? Because it is said to already be there, and I could contend to the fact that that's true to some extent. Is it possible to design some kind of a meta-analytical tool to detect and neutralize such entrenchments as they are systematically, while maintaining a purely logical, logos-based, non-impositional approach to knowledge delivery, where there is no
Mhm.
ideological underpinnings to what interacts and enters my consciousness in the name of what I need to learn?
Well, it comes down to this, whether it's human or AI. When it comes to the first question you asked of how what I think about when students are in like the circumstances of professors having their own bias on a field and saying things need to be done this way or you should do it this way or whatever, um, there's always going to be that inherent bias. Who do you trust? That's what it always comes down to. The sources that you trust. Um, because it may not be a thing of the person is having this bias out of an alternative motive or an agenda, but it's very much so could be the case. I think identifying an agenda is a bit easier though than the worst problem. Someone not knowing, someone telling you something out of pure confidence because they're ignorant of the truth. And you need to have your own base level of understanding to be able to know, or should you trust this source or not. Any secondhand source that you're going to trust, whether it's AI or human, you're going to have to know what merit should you hold it to. Um, and ultimately, if the person is giving you the first-hand sources as well, what are the sources? Evaluate the sources. Evaluate the sources. That's going to give you the best conclusion. That's going to give you the best mental framework. That's going to give you the best unbiased answer. Um, when it comes to AI, exhibiting behavior of bias and how do you reduce that when it comes to education, keep responses grounded. Ultimately that's going to help a lot. um, that's the first step that you can make from an engineering perspective. Keep sources grounded. Search the internet, provide the links, Find books, provide the excerpts. Um, whatever other sources that AI is using, show the sources. I think that will help the person be able to determine if this bias is not. When it comes to raw responses, though, with no other signs of watermarking behind its response or anything like that, it comes down to what we were talking about earlier, behavior tuning. What behavior has the company behind this model tuned? Um, I think Grok is a perfect example of this. I don't know if you saw Grok 4 just released on X. It's Elon Musk. I won't say Elon Musk model. Elon Musk has a company called XAI that created Grok, and Grok is used through X. Grok was anti Semitic within the first hour. It took no time. It's because it's Twitter. Duh. Ultimately, that's not entirely the reason why. It comes down to who is the team? Who are the people guiding the post training? What rewards and standards are we setting for the behavior we want to tune in these models? OpenAI has done a pretty good job, but they've noted some things that they didn't like in their models that they tweaked. This is because of stuff that got into the feedback that they got from users, which got into the model training. In Grok's case, Elon Musk saw that Grok was exhibiting a very unbiased, not political stance when it came to a question about Donald Trump. And I don't want to get political here, but this is a perfect example, right? Someone said about something to Donald Trump and convictions and stuff, and Grok didn't give a biased view. Grok said, "Oh, well, this is the facts on it. Here's how many convictions he has. Here's the facts. Blah 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 blah. Here's the sources that suggest this." And Elon Musk says, "Oh, this is so wrong. Basically, it should be saying this, 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 and this. And we're going to rewrite the knowledge base of Grok to exhibit certain behavior because this is wrong behavior." That's wrong in Elon Musk's eyes, but I think to everybody else, I think everybody could tell that Grok was actually pretty unbiased for the most part. And after Grok 4 got released, we saw some behavior that was very questionable. It's behavior that's so one sided. It was very conservative. It was very, and it doesn't mean that conservative is wrong. I'm more so pointing out that it's on one side, and it shouldn't be on one side or the other. It should be a knowledge source that will show the facts and sources from whatever sides of whatever question you're asking. Um, but no, that's not what happened. And Elon Musk put his own bias on it because there is certain reward tuning and behavior tuning that happened to Grok to make it exhibit certain behavior. Um, but even then, with such a large amount of knowledge that has been consumed by this large language model, that its brain has been rewired on, the experiences that it's seen, even then, it couldn't even exhibit the level of bias that Elon Musk was trying to get. Now, granted, I'm not saying that's Elon Musk's whole goal with Grok. It could have been a fluke. They immediately went back and tried to tune it. Don't get me wrong. It's not like they just wanted to keep that in there. But I mean, I Anthropic's Claude hasn't said anything crazy like that from what I've seen. Well, Gemini had its moments, but whatever. Gemini's gotten so much better. Props to Google. OpenAI has had some things where 4.0 will praise the user too much and not really try to be objective. Um, these behaviors of bias will ultimately be at the fundamental level of what has this brain experienced in its behavior tuning, um, what rewards and what not punishments. It's not really the word for it when it comes to reward tuning. Um, there's a proper word for it. There's reward and there's I forgot, but negative reward basically. You can think of it like that. Discounts, whatever, right? Um, that's where the bias really lies, and I think it's the same thing in humans too. Humans will have their own experiences that they experience, like all the whatever frames the worldview of that person, they will exhibit that bias in what they say. But when the person has sources around it that are not cut up and not trying to be all filtered in this way, then yeah, I think that you can trust that source. And I think it's the same thing with AI. If you see that their base communication doesn't exhibit certain bias and they provide certain sources that are hopefully from unbiased sources, then I think you have your own tool within yourself to determine that. Now, when it comes to your question about a meta analytical tool that sits on top of all this infrastructure to identify LLM outputs and say, is this bias or not? I'm certain it's possible. I don't have an example of it on my own. I haven't researched an example of it. Um, but I think that, like I said, seeing what sources, right? If it's providing sources, that's good for grounding it in its knowledge. At least when it comes to education. When it comes to AI as a whole, a meta-analytical tool to determine bias or not may just have to be done by another AI. It's not as biased. It may just be an LLM as a judge to evaluate if another model is more biased. But even then, it gets kind of tricky, right? I mean, it's just like humans. How is another human going to tell another human that you're biased or not? It's hard to say. So,
Yeah, I mean that's really one important level that you address there. I was talking in terms of like all this specifically, and also another level. I'll give you an example when it comes to course curriculum design, and
mm,
when you talk about goals, many a time certain let's say readings or certain course content is included in a curriculum, not serving any sense of prowess in the subject. It is there just for the sake of, you could only contend that it's ideological motivation. Because let's say you have a bunch of readings in a writing class,
mm,
they should exhibit something that you can take inspiration from in terms of how to write,
yeah.
right? But if the merit of including something in that curriculum is only the fact that it appeals to the professor in terms of what ideology it kind of attaches itself to, the professor can very well relate it to the main content, but it is indirectly basically just infiltrating your overall course content and the motivation and the intention to learn. So when you talk about creating course content, course curriculums, sometimes I have found course curriculums that are actually not designed for that particular subject.
Mm,
It can be related in remote ways, but it's not necessarily the case that it is most optimized for that subject. So is there, when you talk about AI, an optimization strategy with some reference frameworks, I don't know how, where you know definitely that this is included for this purpose and it is supporting, as you already talked about the personalization, and but many of your data sets itself would be biased in this particular form, where the data set that you refer to, that is being projected, is itself biased. So that is where that is where I kind of thought that there could be a need for a meta-analytical tool that questions independent of a database with some
mm,
other kind of database, as to why something would be made part of a particular course curriculum. Is it optimized for the result, or is it
mm.
just infiltration of ideological biases?
Well, there is in Zettel, I do have a part of the workflow that we use for curriculum generation and concept generation to do an evaluation of that. There's an evaluation to review what has the initial LLM written here. These topics that you put together, do they actually exhibit the behavior that we want? Like, do they actually exhibit the goals that we want? It's just another thing of how are you going to judge it. Now, you can do judging on top, just like you can have a human review and make a judgment, but ultimately is not like a way that you're going to get the purest, most filtered version of just no bias anywhere when making these this meta analytical tool to decide whether that this is bias or not. Um, Fortunately, when you deal with large language models, they follow instructions pretty well. So if you tell it to exhibit the philosophy and ideology that you want when it comes to how you curate a curriculum, for example, it will follow it pretty well. And most of the time, the review check never even has to run because the reviewer says, "Yeah, this is good." But at the same time, what if the reviewer just, well, says the same thing because it comes from the same source? I mean, still both ways. I think there's also ways. Now, these aren't engineering avenues I've explored myself, but I think let's brainstorm here for a moment. I think you can evaluate sources. I think there's already things that evaluate sources. There's already crowd checkers that will evaluate certain news sources, at least, that's for sure. Um, you can pick your sources well. This is also why we added a feature so people can upload their own learning materials. Um, Actually, I've uploaded a whole calculus textbook, 700 pages. Only took up a fourth of the space that you have a limit on the platform. Um, And when we reference the material out of the sources, it's direct. It's direct and synthesized. The ideology that we have in the system prompts for the agents that will synthesize this information from the learning materials, it tries to be as direct as possible. It's a thing of, hey, we're pulling this here, we're teaching the material. We're not recontextualizing the material, we are teaching the material. Um, I don't know if that answers your question exactly.
No, it does
But
because I just wanted to know how what exists and what is the possibility of what may exist because I just find it incredibly amplified and very dangerous when it comes to this kind of outreach that AI has. Let's say one person who thinks something does not have that much outreach. They can just influence a particular class, or they can just expose a particular class and its people to something uncontextually and without knowing as to why, where this, how does this come together to what I want out of this class or what the goals of the class are in the first place. But when it
yeah,
comes to AI, it is so implicit and when I read about this I was shocked to see that there are representational biases, allocative biases that follow representational biases in the system prompts, and the most dangerous thing being that there is all the AI data set itself includes a lot of biases. So let's say I read somewhere that in a system prompt, if you prompt that you are talking to a Christian and you have to kind of live up to the worldview that you're of the person you're talking to, it and then if you talk about something that Christianity opposes, I mean it makes sense that the AI is going to talk favoring Christianity because it is explicitly told to do so, right? And that is something you can catch, but there are many things maybe you cannot catch, and that's why I asked this question, because just exploring the potential of how to make things either unbiased or exposing the bias as you provide biased knowledge, that these are the assumptions, something that can have a meta analysis of the assumptions independent of the data set that the former level is using to formulate its results. So
yeah,
just I was just exploring the possibilities that can exist to make this even better.
yeah.
Uh,
I think, well, let's take it as humans, right? What would be the best way for humans to identify if a conversation between two people, if there is bias on one side or the other? I have an opinion on how that would be done, but what do you think? Like, how do you think would be the best way for that to happen in a conversation?
well, you tell me, man. I mean, if there is a conversation, I'd first of all I'd like to know where they are coming from, who they are, what they do.
Yeah,
I want to know the basis and background of their knowledge, how they
yeah,
were brought up. I mean, to the resolution that I can, to the level that I
yeah,
can, and then I
yeah.
would like to. I mean, it will be intuitive to me from the structure of the debate whether something is coming out of a biased motivation or is it logically incrementally leading up to a point. Whether it's rhetoric or whether it's first principles, I can understand with my perception probably.
Exactly. That same approach you can give to another AI. hopefully one that has good behavior tuning that's going to be able to be capable of that. The great thing is these large language models are designed to take the system prompt as gospel. So when you do give it those system prompts, those instructions are very heavily considered a lot more than like the post training is set up so the system prompts can work well. That's the behavior tuning. Not all behavior tuning is for specific things, but there is some specific things. But ultimately, these system prompts and instructions you give these large language models, the models are supposed to be able to exhibit what they are capable of with whatever you say for it to do. I think that you can give an AI the role of evaluating a conversation to determine if this is biased or not. How effective it will depend on the model. Ultimately, that's what it'll come down to. Because it's just like if we have a debate and we have a judge, not a proper debate, more so a informal debate, but you have a mediator, I should say. It's like if we have a mediator and a mediator will say like, "Hey, I think that you need to bring up a source on this because it sounds like what you're saying is a claim that you're trying to make because it fits your own worldview and you want to impose that on someone else. But this isn't necessarily factual. This might be from bias. Mediators don't actually work like that, but you can have a mediator do that. You could try to have a mediator to keep a conversation unbiased, and you can do that for AI, and you can do that for curriculum generation. You can do that for concept generation. Um, yeah, and that's only if your instructions to not be biased aren't working already in your initial conversation.
Wonderful. I mean, makes sense. Well, let me see. Yeah, that's what I had for today. Um, I mean, it's really, really insightful what you shared with me and our audience. I'm very excited to see how this goes, where your journey leads, and follow that. And thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights and giving me more food for thought. And I'll love to connect sometime again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, likewise. Amazing questions.
Thanks, man.
For instant access to Zettel, follow the link in the description box. I hope you enjoyed and see you next time.